Hello again, and thanks for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. On this 21st day of March 2022, I'm David Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service. I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, yesterday, spring started at 7:33 in the morning on Sunday on the 20th, and that means today, the 21st, was the first full day of spring. Vernal equinox, meaning day length, is 12 hours everywhere in the world now. And of course, the northern latitudes will start getting longer days than the southern latitudes. And moving on to the first hazardous weather graphic, we've got a winter storm warning out there for the Klondike Highway, northern panhandle, and that's out through Tuesday night, and that's for heavy snow. Looking for 1 to 2 feet, and I should specify that's above 1,000 feet there for the Klondike Highway. So that puts Skagway, for example, in the rain area. Expected to be rain there, maybe mixed with snow at times. But again, above 1,000 feet, 1 to 2 feet of snow expected through Tuesday night, with the 2-foot snowfall even higher than 1,000 feet up at the higher elevations for that amount. And also south winds gusting to 45 miles an hour, so even above 1,000, 1,500 feet tomorrow night. Late Tuesday and Tuesday night, some blowing snow starting to develop there. Otherwise, there are no other watches, warnings, or advisories out around the state. Looking pretty good with high pressure dominating, although we have a pretty good storm coming into the Gulf, but nothing that'll produce any watches or warnings, only the moisture flowing in there to the panhandle, falling as snow, as I mentioned, up along the Klondike Highway. Otherwise, you can see a frontal boundary tending to weaken as it pushes eastward into an area of high pressure. It's been very persistent over the central Bering Sea. Ridge kind of shifting eastward, getting nudged eastward by that front, but it's taking a toll on it. Just some gusty winds and rain or snow for the AKwx area. Nothing too heavy. Moisture coming over the top of that. You can see the faint area there in the Bering Strait across St. Lawrence Island, and then kind of thinning out as it head towards the Pribilof. So that's bringing some snowfall, enough moisture. It's deep enough for some snowfall to occur from the Bering Strait down to Savunga. At times, they're carrying down to a half mile in snow at times, along with some fog there. Otherwise, pretty dry over the remainder of the state, starting out in the cold side. Temperatures in the minus 30s for lows from the northwest interior there, or the northwest northern Seward Peninsula, back to areas of the North Slope and the Arctic coast. Morning lows starting out about 30 to 35 below, and then south of the Brooks Range and off to the southeast, not so far below zero. Otherwise, you can see a band of moisture draped across the northern panhandle, another band there across the Queen Charlottes, and that associated with the next front there, that's warm front south of the Queen Charlottes there, 982 millibar low. Otherwise, a trough system weakening into a trough here this afternoon off the north coast of the panhandle. Rainfall amounts not too terribly heavy. Hoonah picked up about a quarter of an inch of precipitation, 12-hour amount ending earlier this afternoon. Haines overnight picked up about 3 inches of snow. Temperatures a little above freezing there, so kind of a heavy wet snow falling there. And then Petersburg picked up about tenth of an inch of rainfall, and in Metlakatla about 0.04 of an inch. So nothing really heavy. More moisture, though, with that system off to the south expected to move in. And then some lingering snow. Eureka earlier actually this morning, had some light snow falling there in the Copper River Basin, but that clearing out, clear skies this afternoon there, and that kind of tapering off and from west to east. And Prince William Sound pretty clear, Kodiak clear, much of interior Alaska looking at a lot of sunshine this afternoon, with, again, those clouds slipping through the Bering Strait into St. Lawrence Island. Then a weakening frontal system there, the warm front spreading some rain and snow into the central Aleutians. And for tonight, that system will continue to weaken, not much of a gradient at all associated with it. So wind's no factor at all with that weak system, just some light moisture with it. And then again with a cold front, maybe dropping snowfall levels back down towards sea level for the far western Aleutians. Whoever does fall will be light. But look for increasing winds. Gales for sure are coming into the North Gulf Coast, especially the eastern North Gulf Coast tonight, and along the Panhandle, gale force winds ahead of that front, with rain possibly moderate to heavy at times, and then the heavy snow warning up along the Klondike Highway above 1,000 feet through Tuesday night. Tightening gradient there over the Copper River Basin and across southern Alaska, so winds will be on the increase, kind of a gap flow type situation through the passes of the Alaska Range, especially over the Copper River Basin. Probably be pretty breezy northway and along the Copper River to the Copper River Delta area. And Valdez probably keep the gusty winds going. They've had gusts this morning to about 40 miles an hour off and on. And Eldred Rock, south winds gust 40 to 45 miles an hour. That'll continue tonight. And again tomorrow as low pressure actually develops over the Yukon. For tonight, look for a chance of snow showers over the eastern Arctic coast and still a chance of snow showers there over the eastern interior areas. Then we'll see tomorrow that area tends to expand westward with the easterly flow on the north side of that low that's now weakening, that's in the Gulf of Alaska, southern Gulf of Alaska. And that'll continue to pump moisture up from southwest to northeast there into the Panhandle. Windiest conditions on the north coast. And again, very 45-mile-an-hour wind gusts, Lynn Canal on up towards Skagway with that 998 millibar low developing over the Yukon. Otherwise clear and breezy from the Arctic coast, even a little more breezier through the passes of the Brooks Range, but nothing too strong wind-wise. And light winds out along the west coast, and stays breezy. Small craft advisories continue for the Alaska Peninsula through tomorrow, and but light winds with variably cloudy skies, low clouds, fog, and flurries again at times for the St. Lawrence Island area to the Bering Strait. Kind of hard to say if any of that will reach the Pribilofs. It could, but basically looking pretty good, and some leftover moisture keeps rain and snow showers over the Aleutians with that front that washes out, and then actually another development back to the west there brings rain and snow into Shimia and Attu. And then moving on to the forecast for Wednesday. Stays unsettled, rain and snow showers, mostly rain showers of southern Panhandle. Any snow will be at higher elevations. And again, looking at snowfall levels probably rising above 2,000 feet there, even for the northern Panhandle, with warmer air and that southerly flow. Periods of rain for the North Gulf Coast, rain and snow over the inland areas. Chance of snow maybe into the western Alaska Range. It'll be very light, more of a snow shower condition. And some of that will slip on up into the Copper River Basin and up over the eastern interior with a tighter gradient. Could be some areas of blowing or maybe drifting snow, but new snowfall amounts will be quite light up over those areas. No snow at all, stays variably cloudy to mostly clear for the central interior to the north slope, and maybe some clouds eastern Arctic coast. Clear skies in the offshore flow on the west side, and mostly clear over the northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island. And then the flow picking up some moisture again, and that'll fall in the form of snow along and on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. And then a chance of snow showers come into the the Nikolsky area, Univac Island, on Alaska should stay dry. And then it looks like showers in the form of rain or snow for the central Aleutians back toward Shimia and Attu. Moving on to the lows tonight, staying fairly cold up over the interior. North of the Alaska Range, anywhere from 15 to 20 below, and then 20 to 30 below for the Arctic coast and the North Slope area. Some areas, again, could drop down to 35 below. Umiat Airfield, for example. Minus 27 for Arctic Village. Seward Peninsula, minus 2 at Nome to 15 below at Shishmaref. 3 above the low for Savunga. 9 St. Paul, near freezing for the Aleutians. In the 20s for the Alaska Peninsula. And 15 to 25 south central Alaska, near 0 the Copper River Basin. Pretty mild in the Panhandle with mild southerly flow, clouds and rain. Lows mostly in the 40s. Cooler in Lynn Canal toward Haines. And then highs tomorrow, 40s, mid-40s, lower to mid-40s for the southeast coast, lower to mid-30s south central Alaska, in the in the teens for the central interior, below 0 from the Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast, near 20 for the Pribilofs, near 40 in the Aleutians. That'll be followed by lows for Wednesday morning. Not so far below zero, say call it 0 to 10 below for the central interior, Tanana Valley areas, and 15 to 25 for south central Alaska, 0 to 10 for the Copper River Basin, above freezing, 30s, mid to upper 30s for the Panhandle, and in the upper teens to lower 20s, Alaska Peninsula, single numbers for Bristol Bay, back down to 9 for St. Paul, lower 30s for the remainder of the Aleutians, and 20 to 30 below for the North Slope. Moving on to the highs, Wednesday afternoon. A little bit warmer up that way, but still below zero for the North Slope and Arctic coast, but 5 to 10 below for your highs, and pushing into the lower 20s there for Bettles. Otherwise, teens to upper 20s for the Fairbanks area, central interior locations, 30 to 35, or mid-30s south central Alaska, in the 40s, some cases upper 40s for the southern southeast coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather showing some IFR in the central North Slope. Otherwise, pretty good VFR interior Alaska. Some marginal VFR northwest coast. Down toward Buckland, Kotzebue Sound, Selawik, eastward into the Kobuk Valley. And some more there between Fort Yukon and Eagle. Otherwise, pretty good conditions all the way down until you get to the North Gulf Coast. IFR there, southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula, just east of Kodiak Island. On up across Cordova and into Yakutat, marginal VFR for the entire southeast coast, and VFR, eastern western Bering Sea and the Bering Strait with a zone of IFR and marginal conditions in advance of the frontal boundary out that way, affecting mostly Atka Island, and then we'll see where that goes in the afternoon, eastward into the Fox Islands, especially Unmak Island. IFR there, but not quite making it to the Pribilofs, and then good VFR both to the west and to the east. Some marginal VFR in areas northeast Bristol Bay up into the Kuskokwim Valley, then northeastward there along the mountains and to the north, just barely getting into Denali Park, and then looks like extending down into the Talkeetnas along the central eastern Alaska range and from about the Fairbanks area eastward to Eagle and the border. IFR still along the North Gulf Coast, southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula, to about Yakutat, and mostly marginal for the Panhandle, though some IFR showing up now toward Misty Fjords and those areas. And that holds into Wednesday morning, no change there. And North Gulf Coast IFR down to Fognak Island now. Southern Prince William Sound, maybe some IFR sneaking in, but marginal VFR for sure, into the central Kenai Peninsula. Southern Bristol Bay wrapping up across Cape Newenham into the Bethel area, then the lower Yukon River valleys, and part of the Kuskokwim Valley there along the Kuskokwim Mountains actually. Nothing too significant. Otherwise VFR in the interior all the way up to the Arctic coast. That band of IFR holding there over the Unmak Island area, southwest, west-southwest of the Pribilofs. And that becomes marginal VFR Wednesday afternoon out there in the central Bering Sea down to the eastern Aleutians near Atka, but not making it to the Pribilof, staying VFR there, Alaska Peninsula, western interior areas, and then a couple of zones of lower conditions for the North Slope and the eastern Arctic coast. Some lingering IFR possible, Fognak Island into the Barrens, Kamishak Bay, marginal mostly for areas east and south of the Alaska Range, and then that lingering marginal VFR zone for the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country. And all of the Panhandle, marginal VFR. Passes tomorrow for Tuesday, Anaktuvik and Adigan, both looking good, VFR, either approach. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR, look for an increase in the clouds though, ceilings lowering in the afternoon, as well as rainy, staying VFR throughout the day, but lowering ceilings in the afternoon. Windy, VFR possibly becoming marginal in the afternoon. Isabel more likely becoming marginal in the afternoon, and then just occasional marginal VFR from Antasta the entire day. Tanita, VFR trending toward marginal. And Portage, same thing, starting out VFR, becoming marginal in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR the entire day, Tuesday. Freezing levels, quite a gradient beginning to develop there across the southeast coast. 2,000 feet, Lincoln Glacier Bay Area down to 8,000 feet toward Dixon. Actually, the Queen Charlotte's 8,000 feet. Otherwise, at the surface near the Alaska Peninsula, starting to finally warm up a little bit out over the Bering Sea there, but just south-southwest of the Pribilofs. And for icing, some Considerable moderate rime icing rolling on into the panhandle with that good south to southwest jet pulling it in, be heaviest over the central and southern areas with lighter icing mounts back to the west along the North Gulf Coast, increasing areas of moderate possible over the southeast interior, and then another zone there with that frontal boundary out over the central Aleutians. And jet stream showing south-southwest flow, 140 knots right in across the central and southern southeast coast on the east side of that low complex from the Yukon Flats down to just east of Kodiak Island. North-northeast, 65 to 90 knots there over the western interior. Pretty light for the Aleutians, though. And at 9,000 feet, east-northeast, 40 to 45 knots. Northerlies for the Alaska Peninsula, east-northeast there toward the Seward Peninsula and northern interior. Southwest, 50 to 60 knots into the Panhandle. 3,000 feet, we've got 40 knot east-northeasterlies through the interior. Turbulence, moderate chop, Panhandle and along the Alaska Range.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
The Space Weather Prediction Center has had a long-standing relationship with the power industry, so they've been aware that solar storms, the geomagnetic storm piece of that, can affect the operation of their systems and induce extra currents and loads on those systems that can either trip those systems offline or in the worst of cases, cause damage. That relationship goes back for several decades. In fact, a big incident in 1989 where part of Quebec was tripped offline that affected something like 6 million customers for about 9 hours. I think that really raised the awareness in the power industries.
When we get the alert, we watch the grid and start looking for issues. Are we seeing a decline in voltage? Are we seeing equipment failures? And we readjust the system to try to mitigate those problems, try to keep the lights on and keep it from going out.
So averaging about 500, 550 kilometers per second.
If we didn't have this early warning, we wouldn't see it until our sensor saw it. Getting more information quicker and faster before the storm hits, not during the storm, is a big improvement.
In the long term, I think what we need and what we're moving toward, the U.S. as a whole, is better modeling, fully understanding this phenomenon, understanding how it would impact specific systems.
Rather than actually experiencing a storm, we can simulate storms in our software and see what the impact is. We try to get ahead of it. We always plan that if there's an outage, how can we keep the lights on? What's the best process to prevent it?
In the end, 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a whole mix of operational procedures driven by what we do on prediction and warning. And then there also will probably be some level of hardware controls to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
There's different types of impacts on communication systems, and the HF we call the high frequency, which is that band of communications 3 to 30 megahertz. But it's a very important band of radio communication because it's used widespread. It's used, for example, by the airlines.
HF radio is most commonly used for position reporting when you're going across the ocean airspace, which is devoid of radar. And ATC can't see you, so it's up to you to report your position and your altitude and your speed.
HF works great most of the time, except during a big flare. And during a big flare, that HF communication capability could be gone within a minute or two. So as soon as we see something happening in there and we see a flare, it's one of the first things we do is alert the aviation community, hey, big flare, HF's going to be impacted.
Once we know that there's an event going on, then the aviation industry and the airlines can react to that. They can alter their routes over the poles. They can lower the altitudes that they're flying at, or maybe decide not to fly at all in the interest of the passenger safety.
So that's just one example of how HF is used, but the emergency response community will use it a lot too. It's one of their primary backups.
When you've lost connectivity between certain government agencies, it gives you that long-range coverage to talk from out-of-state to federal governments or from the FEMA locations to the state emergency operations centers.
So if you've got a big hurricane impact in the coastline, whatever big city, we've got the cell towers down and whatnot, we've got emergency communication folks in there. Those folks are very familiar with space weather and how it impacts their systems.
Here in recent years, it was used during Katrina when we had a lot of communications outages down there. It was also used during Hurricane Ike. There was an outage of the telephone circuits with the Texas State Emergency Office, so it was used in both of those situations.
So when we talk about backup, especially for the airlines, typically they'll have SATCOM, so that'll be satellite communication.
The satellite technology that emergency responders use could be GPSs, could be satellite phones, satellite data terminals.
Space weather events can impact SATCOMs. The impact can range from a nuisance to loss of a spacecraft. So we will give them the heads up. If we have space weather events, flares, whatnot, they need to know what's impacting their systems. Situational awareness is key. Time is of essence to these folks. Again, it's life and death.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at the coastal water forecast, gale warnings. South coast, southerly winds 35 to 40 knots. And for the north coast, south to southeast winds 35 gusting 45 knots. Lynn Canal winds high enough for small craft advisories, south sustained at 25 knots. Stevens Passage, small craft advisories, southeast 25 gusting 40 knots. And for Clarence Strait, southeast 25 knots, gusting to 35 knots. And for the outlook on Wednesday, small craft advisories all along the coastline, winds south 25 knots, seas around 15 feet. South winds 25 knots for Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, northern inside waters. South winds 25 knots there. Lighter winds for Stevens Passage, southeast at 15. Clarence Strait, winds coming down to 20 knots from the south, sea subsiding to about 4 feet. Prince William Sound tomorrow, small craft advisories, northeast winds at 25 knots. Good gales for the North Gulf Coast, north to northeasterlies, sustained 35 knots, gust up 50 knots toward Middleton Island. Otherwise, the Barren Islands, north at 35 knots. Gale warnings for Kamishak Bay, northwest winds 35 knots. Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, northerlies 25 to 30 knots with 6 to 8 foot seas. And for Wednesday, Cook Inlet, northeast winds coming down from Tuesday's values, northeast at 20 to 25 knots. Small craft advisories, Kamishak Bay, northeast at 25 knots. And winds south now for the Barren Islands at 25 knots, seas about 10 feet. And small craft advisories for the North Gulf Coast, southeast winds 25 to 30 knots. And Prince William Sound, small craft advisories continue. Winds east at 25 knots, seas at about 5 feet. Kodiak Island, gale warnings, northwest winds 35 knots. The Alaska Peninsula, small craft advisories, north to northwest winds 25 knots, 7 to 8 foot seas there. And for Bristol Bay, small craft advisories, north winds at 25 knots. And then for Wednesday, for Bristol Bay, winds coming down lighter, now northwest at 15 knots. And the Alaska Peninsula, small craft advisories continue. Northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. Kodiak Island, looking at lighter wind conditions, west-southwest at 15 knots with 4 to 8 foot seas. Eastern Aleutians, Unalaska Island, north to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots, becoming light and variable for Unamac Island. Adak and Atka, west-northwest, 20 to 25 knots. And Amchitka Island, west of 20, small craft advisories, Kiska to Shemya, west winds 25 knots. And then for Wednesday, 30-knot winds from the west, from Shemya all the way toward Adak Island for Adak to Atka. In those zones, gale warnings west 35 knots. And for the Fox Islands, gale warnings, west-northwest winds 30 to 35 knots, 12 to 13-foot seas. Southwest coast, northerly winds 20 to 30 knots. Pribilof's pretty light in the winds now, northeast at 10, northeast 15 for St. Matthew Island. St. Lawrence Island, northerlies at 15 knots. And then for Wednesday, Norton Sound, brisk wind advisories, northeast winds coming up to 25 knots. St. Lawrence Island, north winds at 20 knots. Brisk wind advisories for the Yukon Delta coastline north at 25. Otherwise, all other zones looking at northwest winds at about 20 knots. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, Tuesday, east winds 15 knots. Central coast, east winds at 10 knots, and 15-knot winds from the east for the western Arctic coast down to Cape Thompson to Wales, northeast winds at 10 knots. And for Wednesday, brisk wind advisories, an increase in the winds all along the coastline, 25 to 30 knots for the entire stretch of the Arctic coast up there from Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, northeast at 30. Lighter winds though from Cape Thompson to Wales down to 15 knots, still from the northeast. And for tonight, a pretty strong low south of the Gulf of Alaska will push an active front into the central and southern coastal areas of the Panhandle with increasing winds and rain. Winter storm warning for the Klondike Highway above 1,000 feet for 1 to 2 feet of snow. And that's out through Tuesday night. Otherwise, tightening gradient means increasing winds across, especially through the passes of the Alaska Range and the North Gulf Coast areas. Resurrection Bay, Kodiak, pretty breezy but dry and clear. And on the cold side for the western and northern interior, weakening front brings moisture across the Aleutians. That dissipates Tuesday. Another front develops farther to the west. Low pressure starts to weaken in the Gulf of Alaska. It keeps a wet weather pattern going over the Panhandle. And that starts to circulate some moisture westward over the southeast interior, but the western areas to the north stay dry through Wednesday. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.